Hi, it's Tess. Welcome to How to Live in the Promises of God. We talked in part one about knowing for sure, being settled in your heart and mind of the love and grace of God. Today we're going to do part two, and we're going to talk about what is the meaning of a promise of God. The word promise in the Greek means an announcement, a pledge, a message. A promise from God is not like man's promises. Man can say something like, hey, I'll see you at 3 tomorrow. I promise I won't be late. You know, we get married and we do vows and we sign an agreement between husband and wife that we will never leave them, and we make promises. And we know in society there are over 50% of the marriages end in divorce. There's a lot of ways that people make promises. Countries have an alliances and treaties, right? And they make promises with one another, and that sometimes is changed. But when God makes a promise, it's not like a human making a promise. Humans break promises, but when God makes a promise, it is irrevocable and it is not changed. We're going to look at what that means. What is a promise? So in Genesis 12, we see that God talked to Abraham, and it says that he made a covenant with Abraham. So that word covenant, made a covenant, when it translated into the Hebrew, is karet bedet, which means to cut a promise, to cut a covenant, to cut an alliance, an agreement. So God calls Abraham and says, go leave this land, go to another land. I am going to bless your name. I'm going to give you the nations, your descendants will have this land. And Abraham goes. And then in Genesis 15, he says, you're going to have a son from your own body. You're going to have descendants that will inherit the land. And Abraham says, how will I know that my descendants will have this land? And I thought it was just a fascinating question, because he's credited with believing God, but here he's saying, how am I going to know? And that word know is translated, it's yada. It's the Hebrew word yada, and it's translated to mean perceive, recognize, and experience. So in other words, how am I going to perceive this promise? How am I going to experience this promise? And what I thought was really interesting, God did not, right away, God said, okay, go get these animals. He had him get a goat, a ram, a heifer, which is a young cow, and he did a ritual that was common back then to do a covenant. Nations would do them, tribes would do them, and he did a covenant with Abraham, and he cut these animals in half. Abraham cut them in half because he knew what he was doing. But Abraham was put to sleep. God put him to sleep, and God actually walked in between those animals. It says in a blazing torch, so his spirit would walk through that corridor. And this was what was done at the time, and it meant that if I don't fulfill my part of this covenant with you, let it be done to me what is being done to these animals. But God didn't have Abraham walk the corridor with him. He did it by himself, because he was saying, I don't really need you to do your part. I'm going to do my part, even if you don't do your part. It was a powerful thing, and Abraham understood it. So in Deuteronomy 28, blessings, we have a list of promises. There'll be blessings on the land. You'll be fruitful. The harvest, the fruit of your womb will thrive. You'll be blessed coming in, going out. So in your travels, you'll be blessed. Then in the New Testament, in Galatians, it says, all who believe are children of Abraham. So in Galatians 3:14, Jesus redeemed us so that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles. So you don't just have to be from the family, the Jewish nation, to be blessed. Now, Jesus was really illustrating on the cross that those promises were for the Gentiles who came to believe in Jesus. Romans 15:8, Jesus confirms that the promises made to the patriarchs, he has confirmed it through what he did in the New Testament, right? Galatians 3:29, if you belong to Christ, then are Abraham's seeds and heirs according to the promise. So if you belong to Christ, you're grafted into the family of Abraham. Galatians 4:7, we are sons and daughters of God, and therefore we are heirs. So if you think about this in the natural, if you have a wealthy, loving family, they have children. Those children go into the will. They become part of the family. If they adopt a child, they put them in the will, and at a certain age, at a certain maturity date, those children will inherit the assets and inherit what's in that will. So God, like that, God has made some promises that for your life, really specifically, for a specific time, that specific maturity date that cannot be changed. It's been appointed that you will walk into because of your faith, your maturity level, and because you are a daughter or son of God. You will inherit those promises. So how do we know what they are? In addition to those that were given to Abraham, the scriptures have over 8,800 promises, really specific ones. For any situation in your life, you can look in the scriptures and find a promise. David says in Psalms that the children of the righteous are mighty in the land. Moses said in the commandments that if you honor your father and your mother, you will be blessed with long life. And that's just a couple of so many, right? So I want to give an example with my son. When my son was about 4, 5, 6, he was very aggressive, assertive. He wasn't gentle, he was rough. He'd give you a hug and it was like a football tackle. And I remember just thinking, nothing's working. I don't know how to teach him to be kind and gentle. And I read in a book about just declaring God's promises over your children. And so I started to pray that my children are mighty in the land. And I started to thank God that he was patient, that he was loving, that he was gentle. Fast forward to the 3rd grade, I got a collage from his teacher. And half of the comments on the collage from his classmates were about how kind and nice and it was to know him. And the other half of the comments were about him being a good athlete. But it was such an amazing moment to me. I just started crying because I just was like, wow, this is who he's becoming. This is what he's become, kind and gentle. And so we're going to actually talk in the next video about how to live in the promises. We're going to go over details about how to walk in God's promises. But thank you for joining me, and we'll see you in the next video.